Okay, so that's all obvious, I hope. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. Now, okay. So I think I just want to get crack into it. I've got some guidelines to just think about, more set the expectation about how to approach the seminar. I'm not stating these because I think people will not do them. It's more just to help people feel safe throughout the seminar. So number one, keeping what is shared here private, just in the consideration of it's not something to gossip about if people kind of share things in the breakout room or wherever else that is personal and then being vulnerable. Number two, being respectful. Particularly, I guess you may hear opinions that are different from yours, and just kind of encourage you to think that now isn't probably the best time to challenge those sorts of things, but we'll have a conversation outside of the seminar. And then three, participating as much as you feel comfortable. So I want to echo what Mike said about you in no way need to take part in the breakout rooms. Please just go at your own pace. Say absolutely no pressure to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing. But at the same time, I'd love to encourage you to participate because often that's where you get more out of these sorts of experiences. And then finally, leading into just looking after yourself throughout the seminar, very much treating you all as adults. If you need to go out, have a cup of tea, go bathroom break, this is your seminar, you're not locked to your screen. And in the same vein, thinking that, if something comes up during the seminar that is upsetting to you, I think like both Mike Chin and Mike Taylor would be welcome to field any sort of questions or be available for support afterwards. And my details will also be shared if you want to know where to look for more help. So I've set three goals for the seminar. Just number one, kind of providing a framework for how to think about young people's and just anyone really, their emotional world. Two, providing a sort of a mindset and a strategy about how to support your children's emotional development. And then three, opening the door to other avenues in which to continue learning. And I will provide suggestions for resources, but part of what I mean here is also continuing to reflect about what is discussed today and having conversations with others about it. And so all up, I was hoping this seminar will provide a message of hope and encouragement to parents about what they can do to support their children's mental health. So I've split this seminar roughly into three parts. The first one I've described as an orientation in which I hope to encourage a growth mindset or a frame of mind for your journeys as parents. Forgive the cliche of journey. And then part two is kind of education, discussion around mental health and providing a neurodevelopmental understanding of emotions. I'll explain what that means. But basically that then informs how we then approach regulating emotions. And then in part three, it's more of the practical how to on bringing up emotionally resilient kids. And that's with the focus of what is known as emotion coaching. And then finally, as Mike said, we'll have time for Q&A for any sort of specific questions. So to anchor the content of today's seminar within a Christian worldview, which Mike Taylor did a really amazing job of, I guess I'm just kind of elaborating a little. And so I've got here the very well-known passage on 1 Corinthians 13. And in particular, I hope to draw attention to how love is described in this passage as a state of mind or being that comes from the heart. And it's not merely a technique that you can apply or a box that you can tick. So I've highlighted in bold particular elements that I'll at least loosely refer to throughout this seminar. So if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, now if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So, following from this passage, I'm proposing 2 ideas to keep in mind throughout the seminar. I borrowed these from a very well-known parenting program called Circle of Security Parenting, and they express where I'm coming from in delivering this information and the attitude or frame of mind that I think is consistent with what Paul describes in that passage. So first up, all your child needs is for you to be good enough. And that is, there is room to make mistakes in parenting. And number 2, it is never too late. That is, to support your children and develop the sort of relationship that you want with them. So as we learn new ways of parenting, good things happen for both you and your child. So this is where I wanted to break out for the first breakout room. And I've proposed here 2 questions. First one is, how can it be okay to make mistakes in parenting when parenting is so important? And the second is, if I learn something new, does that mean I was doing it wrong before and I've already messed up my kids?
G'day, everyone. I was saying in my group that when I look back, my parents certainly have made a lot of mistakes. And there were times when I was feeling really resentful, but I think I turned out all right in the end.
That's good. Yeah. So yeah, based on your experience, yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Absolutely no one is perfect, and I think that relates actually a lot to say that second point. Even when we do things wrong, I think the thing to never give up hope is that kids give us lots and lots of chances to get it right as well. And so I guess, something I'll add to that first one is something that is really important is security in our relationships, so between parents and their kids. A lot is about learning from our mistakes. So rather than, it's not all about having to get it right. So children learn how to learn from their mistakes by watching us learn from ours. And so, yeah, it's just something I'll be mentioning a couple of times throughout the seminar is the importance of modeling parents to their kids about these sorts of things. And so, yeah, and I guess you also I did answer around the second one, but I wonder, is anyone willing to share what they discussed about that second question? I'll give it a few more seconds if anyone's willing to share.
I think, hello, Esther.
Hey.
So we didn't really discuss this because we ran out of time. Well, I pressed the wrong button to exit the group. But to answer this question, I think the nuance is inferring, no, we weren't doing it wrong if we have learned something new. And having the Christian faith as a core in our minds to parents, children, I think in God's eyes, like if we can point them to grow under God's way, I think there can be, different approaches that we could have tried, which we thought, was pleasing God.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I like that answer. And so, yeah, it's having that mindset about learning and growing is super important. So yeah, going back to the Corinthians passage about love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I think if parents get caught up in the experience that they are bad, or their kid is bad, or they're doing it all wrong, we close that door to hope and opportunities to learn and grow stop. So I think that was a really helpful answer. So what I might do is just move on from this and get more into part 2. And so with this, more focusing on a way to think about mental health and how to understand emotions. So what I presented here is something called the biopsychosocial spiritual model. There's so many different ways of thinking about this, but this is quite a common one. So you can think of mental health as made up of biological, psychological, social, and spiritual components, and where they're all balanced and needs are met, right at the center is where we might consider we are mentally well. So examples of biological is genetics. It can be just early neurodevelopmental issues. Psychological, for example, are coping skills or beliefs. Social examples are, schools, the sort of friendships kids have, their social skills. And then spiritual is a person's understanding of the meaning of life, or their expression of faith. And so if you think of this figure as a map of mental health, you can be anywhere on it, and each individual is at their own location. So what I'm trying to convey here is that mental health is a spectrum, very diverse spectrum. And the general rule is that the further you move out from the center of balance and wellness between all these domains, the more severe your symptoms and level of dysfunction. So mental health is also very dynamic. So we are in a constant state of flux and change, and we have inside forces and outside forces that necessitate us to respond and adapt. So depending on the resources we have available to us at the time, we will find wellness, or we may be off kilter. So for example, we, depending on our genetics, and then we have, say, we get a virus, our wellness will depend on the access we have to getting healthcare, the sort of social support we have to support us as we get better. So you can think of mental illness or disorder, it's like getting stuck on the fringes somewhere. So technically, when looking at in the psychiatric definition of mental illness or disorder, what you have, it's characterized by the severity of symptoms. So we're thinking about extreme severity of symptoms and dysfunction. It's also time, so duration. It's not just, experiencing these symptoms in a day, it's over a period of time. And pervasiveness across different contexts. So for example, for a young kid, you'd be seeing the same sort of symptoms at home, at school, in their extracurricular activities. It's not just focused in any one place. When we think experientially, by that I mean a person's lived experience of having a mental disorder. Mental illness, how I kind of conceptualize it, there'll be many different ways of describing this, but for me, I describe it, it's characterized by rigidly trying to escape or avoid our inner world of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, even when doing so means we lose touch with what is valuable and important to us. So we disconnect or shut down from some aspect of ourselves. And usually this is because something in that young person or adult's history has taught them that certain aspects of their inner world are unacceptable or intolerable, and therefore to be hidden, escaped, or avoided at all costs. So, for example, if you have a kid who is socially anxious, they will go into a social situation and it just sets off this whole tone of sensation, which is like it might be a flushed face, it can be heat, it can be sweating, and it's accompanied by this anxiety. It can be a pumping heart, feelings of embarrassment and shame, and that's just a horrible experience. And anyone in that sort of situation is going to just want to get out and make it stop. So it's like, you know what, I'm not going into a social situation anymore. And what we tend to find, these avoidance patterns or behaviors are usually not conscious, but at a deeper subconscious level outside our awareness. And part of the function of therapy is to shine a light of awareness on these sorts of patterns so that they can be changed. And the degree to which a person has ownership or responsibility for these avoidance patterns and behaviors, it increases as we become older. So no responsibility as an infant to, I think, full responsibility as an adult over our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, attitudes, etc. But that said, it also differs depending on our neurobiological makeup to begin with. So if you think, say, for autism spectrum disorder, there's one theory is called polyvagal theory, and they're of the opinion that there's something in that person's very early development that they just go into this freeze immobilization mode because they just never developed that ability to engage socially. And so everything is just so overwhelming as a sensory experience, as a social experience, that person cannot help but be anxious when they're presented in the world. So obviously, we all start from a different place. So I just wanted to pause there. If anyone had any burning questions or something was confusing, please feel free to kind of unmute yourselves. I'll give like about 30 seconds if you want to ask anything at this point. All right, I'll move on. But again, we got the Slido. If you have any questions, just put it there. So next up is, understanding your child's emotional world. And so again, I've got some opportunity if you want to respond to this, seeking your thoughts on what you think is the function of emotions, or another way of asking this question is, what is the purpose of emotion? So we see in the Bible that Jesus himself showed a whole range of emotions during his time on earth. He raged, he wept, he rejoiced. So wondering, your perspective on why did God create us with emotion? So again, if anyone, just unmute yourselves if you want to respond to this question.
Hi, Esther.
Hi.
Yeah. To answer this question, I think to ask and understand why God's created emotions certainly resembles the character of God, the construct of God himself. God was a God who had anger, who had jealousy as his character, and certainly we've inherited some of his likeness when we were created.
Definitely.
It's only when I suppose sin entered into the world and distorted these good emotions that we've started having issues with them. But I think emotions are part of God's good creation, and we have a lot to thank God for.
And yeah, and I'm curious, yeah, if you don't mind saying your thoughts on why you thank God for those emotions.
So why God made those?
Why you're thankful to God for emotions.
I think like anger, for example, the way I understand it is when we get angry for things we care about, and anger can be expressed in a healthy way or not so healthy way. God was angry towards the Israelites when they rebelled against him because he loved them so much. So I think I thank God for giving me, anger as an emotion myself, because it tells me and tells the people around me what I care about.
Definitely. I think that's a great answer. And so that does lead nicely into my next slide, which is like when we come from a functional perspective of emotions, we don't look at them as either good or bad, but simply information or signals. So, for example, anger is a great example, and it definitely signals something that we care about. Something is wrong, and we need to make a stand for it. Anxiety is similar. If we didn't have anxiety, we'd be dead. It would be, anxiety pops up because we're under threat and we need to do something. Sadness is an example of, hey, you need to slow down. You need to just slow down and recover for a bit. And my own personal view is I think all emotions are functional, bar perhaps shame. And there is a researcher called Brene Brown. A lot of you may know of her. And she does a lot of research on shame, and it's that one emotion that seems to actually not have a good counterpart, and it drives us to hide. It drives us to disconnect from others. And how I kind of see this is I wonder, and I'm curious if it's a legacy from the Garden of Eden. That first emotion we had was shame, and it drove us from God. So that's something that I've been wondering about. And so going back to mental illness, the problem is not emotions themselves, but our response to them. So you may recall I talked about how we can get stuck in unhelpful patterns of behavior in order to avoid certain aspects of our inner world. So it's more, rather than trying not to be a robot and not have feelings, because again, as was pointed out, that means we wouldn't care about anything. Instead, we need to learn how to have them in such a way that we can go about our lives and do what we need to do with whatever emotions we are experiencing. And this is what emotion regulation is all about and what we'll focus on for the rest of the seminar. So just to point out some benefits of emotion regulation for young people, I won't spend too long in here. I'll just highlight some things. And so one being reduced likelihood of developing mental illness, including anxiety and depression. Interacting well with the world, manage frustration where things don't go our way. Being able to delay gratification, know that we can't always have what we want when we want it. And just skipping down to say improved ability to learn. There is some research out there that our ability, young people, so it's done amongst teenagers, their ability to name and so identify and name their emotions had an almost equivalent effect on academic outcomes at school as their IQ score. So this emotional regulation is incredibly important. So this is the neurodevelopmental understanding of emotion, what goes on in the brain when we're experiencing emotion. So some background about how we develop in this ability. The brain grows in sequence. The reacting brain develops very early, followed by the emotional brain and then the thinking brain. That part doesn't develop until much later, and we don't fully develop it until young adulthood. So consequently, the ability to use the thinking brain to control and regulate emotions as they're felt, that doesn't happen until much later. And so we are experiencing big emotions. You see that in young kids, that their ability to manage them is not as well developed as you would expect and hope for an adult. So the reacting brain here is responsible for unconscious things like breathing, blinking, your heart. The thinking brain is responsible for such things as reasoning and planning and impulse control. That emotional brain in the middle is responsible for our emotional states, again, which act as a signaling system for our interaction with ourselves, with others, and the world around us. And that includes keeping us safe. So what I've got here is I'm going to play a video. This is Dr. Dan Siegel, and he has what some of you may know, it's called a hand model of the brain. It just kind of explains what goes on during a fight, flight, freeze response, which is, you may all know, it's when humans are under threat. We either respond with fight, which is I'm going to get angry and defend myself, we flight, which is run away, or we freeze, which is like the last resort, I'm just going to freeze. And you see that with, say, rabbits or deers, you know, that famous expression, deers in a headlight. So I'll play this one.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist. And then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas. And the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Cool. So to kind of just go from the back of that video, anyone can find that on YouTube. He's got his own website. I've listed it as a resource as well. Is thinking about this flipping the lid in the context of zones of arousal. So what you've got here on the arrow going up, there is level of arousal. And so you can see, you know, when we're in the green zone, we're all calm, things are connected. As we start getting a little bit more agitated, something irritates us, we flip our lids, we're into the red zone. And it's at this point that the thinking brain isn't connected, where we're just operating on instinct. And we've all had those sorts of experiences where we're just so anxious or we're just really frustrated, we're not thinking right. And if someone tries to reason with you or say, calm down, you're like, you can't do it. And so it's at that point where when kids or adults, anyone's in that zone, it's not the time to kind of come in with cool, calm reasoning. We actually need kids to find ways to help that thinking brain reconnect to the reacting emotional brain, and then come back down to that green zone. And that's where we can start reasoning and implementing some lessons. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this, but again, I just wanted to take a pause. If anyone's got a burning question, I'll give again a 30-second window if anyone wants to ask that now.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yep.
So are we basically to assume that emotion can be regulated by our rationale?
Yes. So what will be, I guess, it depends on what you mean by that. But if you're talking about language and being able to raise awareness through and engaging that thinking brain's awareness, even when we're in reactive states, definitely. And that's part of the role of what we'll be going on to next around emotion coaching and being able to label and put language and words to what's going on. That is how we engage that thinking brain to regulate. Correct. Okay, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll move on. And so this is, how to support your child's emotional development. And this is where we're going more into that practical how-to segment. And so how, young people learn emotion regulation. I want to start with this really emphasizing empathy. And in that circle of security training I mentioned before, they describe it as this being with, and I think that provides a really lovely picture of what it means to empathize. It means to actually be with someone in their experience. And so empathy is not a technique. It's a state of mind, or it's an underlying attitude of empathy for other people. And in this context, we're thinking about your children. Research shows that our choice to understand and share the feelings our children have is one of the most essential gifts that we have to offer them. And it's our willingness to be with children, feel what they feel, gives them that experience of being safe in their emotional inner world, and that there's nothing in that inner world that they cannot experience. And so they learn this lesson early on, that there is nothing in that inner world that they need to learn to avoid, that they need to escape from. It's safe and stable. And so for many of us, it's easiest to be with or empathize with our kids when they're feeling happy. And it's really hard when they're upset. So when they're irritable or angry or sad, and we often want to get them back to happy. And what we'll do is we'll distract them, or we'll try to talk them out of their upset. But research shows that what helps kids most is having us with them in their emotions. It shows that putting pressure on kids to actually feel something other than distress takes them longer to regulate than if we actually sit with them and empathize with them in that experience. And so some reassuring information about empathizing, or this being with, is that we only actually need to be with your child's feeling, say, about 30% of the time, and that seems to be good enough. So again, going back to this idea of being a good enough parent, you're not needing to be a perfect parent, a good enough parent. And that 30% obviously is even hard to achieve. So it's, as much as you can, being in this state of being with and empathizing with your kids. And so this second point about young people learn how to regulate emotions with this being with. And so that means they learn how to do this within the context of the relationship that you have with them. And so with this figure, what I've got here is, initially with young kids, feelings are all organized by the parent. So as you would have experienced with particularly very young infants or babies, you're kind of asking, what's wrong? Are you tired? Are you hungry? What's wrong? And you're giving all the words. And until they start getting older, it's more that, okay, they can start giving some sort of indications of what's going on. And that's where they're starting to learn to organize their feelings with your help. And then ultimately, as they mature, they start learning how to do it themselves. And what the goal is here is actually having that combination is best of self and co-regulation. Because in society, we tend to uphold self-regulation and place a lot of responsibility on the individual at the cost of helping us learn healthy interdependence. So helping kids learn how to be with themselves, but also be with others, and for others to be with them. So just, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but because I think Mike already did a really good job. It's this biblical basis for empathy. And so one of my favorites is the top one from Romans, where Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And you'd note here, he's not going, just sit there and share a Bible verse with the person who's weeping, or just, tell them they're there, everything's going to get better. No, he's saying weep, actually literally weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. It's like absolutely being with that person's experience. And I love knowing that God is our greatest empathizer. And in that last verse from Psalms, it's, you've kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? And the psalmists are expressing that, again, God hasn't gone, don't cry, don't be upset. He's actually counted those tears. He's noted and acknowledged them. They're precious to him. And so it's coming to this point of the greatest gift that you can give your children and other people is this sense of, I see you, I hear you, and I understand you. And it's that being there with that person in that space and just being a witness. So never underestimate the gift of being a witness to someone's pain and suffering. So some common challenges that come up for parents and anyone about this being with or empathizing with kids is our own history of which feelings were okay and not okay in our family of origin. So we tend to be more at home with the feelings that our own parents were comfortable with and less at ease with the feelings that made them uncomfortable. So unless we're aware of this, we will likely pass on the same comfort and discomfort, the same, okay, these feelings are okay and these aren't okay, to our children. And so for me personally, I grew up in a home where anger was not okay to express. So I'm still often terrified when people are angry, and it's something I need to learn that actually anger is okay. And the second point is this fear of spoiling children. So again, I'll just suggest, research points that the conclusion, you cannot spoil a child by validating and being with their inner world. Responding to your child's emotional needs doesn't spoil them. We're not talking about, the drop of a hat, you make all your kids' feelings the center of the universe. It's not at all about that. Spoiling is associated with parents not being able to say no. or set limits when a child pushes boundaries. So what we're talking about here is different. So this is where I kind of wanted to just very quickly a breakout room. So maybe, sorry, Mike, just a little bit, maybe 4 minutes or something. Again, I don't know, 3 minutes. With these questions, just what your thoughts are on being with your children, what sort of challenges you've experienced, what gets in the way of you being able to do that, and what helps you be with your children. So this is where, again, I'd love if anyone's willing, happy for you to kind of address any of these sorts of questions, if you'd be willing to share what just you think or what your group discussed.
Hi, Esther. I'm Jessica. I guess I was saying that when the kids are younger, they pretty much wear their emotions on their sleeves, so you know exactly when they're angry, when they're feeling anxious, when they're happy. And it's quite emotionally draining, but you can attend to that. But as they grow into their adolescence, they become very, very cluey about what is acceptable to show in front of their parents and what is not acceptable. And sometimes, you have these poor parents that you've had no idea that they've been emotionally dysregulated for so long until they've had their mental breakdown. And the observation that I've made with teenagers is that they don't always want to, at the end of the day, they don't want to be asked either, like, how was your day? How are you feeling emotionally? That it takes a lot of quantity of time spent with them for you to have a little bit of a quality conversation. So just asking for some tips and advice for parents with teenagers and with some teenagers that just don't want to speak. How can you be with them and empathize with what they're feeling?
Good question. So that's definitely a notorious challenge with adolescents, because we do, I think, grow up, particularly in our society, where we mute or we hide experiences, and we know what is okay and not okay to show. So I think part of the response to that is what we'll be moving on to next, and that is us as the parents and the adults and the role models in that young person's life to show safety and comfortability and acceptability of our emotional experience. So modeling is absolutely critical, and making it okay to express. And so I think, with a lot of teenagers, say me from a therapy point of view, it takes a lot of time, as you mentioned, and patience to develop that safe space for them to be willing to share that sort of aspect of themselves. And sometimes that's particularly challenged with parents because they're too close, and it's nice having this independent person. But that's what I would encourage, is the role modeling, patience, making things safe. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment?
I think in our breakout room, we were just talking about like the challenge of growing up in a family where potentially the parents weren't very good at identifying emotions and allowing emotions to be expressed and seeing them as a healthy thing and having that model. And so,
definitely. And I think, normalizing that, we're not perfect. Our parents definitely weren't perfect. Their parents weren't perfect. And so we get these sorts of things passed down. And the wonderful thing is, like, when we learn these sorts of things, is trying to do better, to grow. There's always that opportunity to be able to do these sorts of things. And again, going back to that message of it's never too late, never. Okay, well, thanks for those contributions. I'll move on and go more into, okay, how do we do this? What are some kind of, I guess, where we've talked about, you know, this being with, or empathy being a mindset, like coming from the heart. And this is more, okay, we've got that mindset. How can we put that into action? And so this is more this strategy technique. So what this is the point where I would highly encourage actually practicing this yourself as a precursor to helping your children. And firstly, this gives you the opportunity to take responsibility for your feelings. It also gives you firsthand that experiential knowledge of what it's like, and it can be so hard, particularly when you're in fight, flight, freeze, you're tired, you're angry, and you're exhausted. So doing this yourself can help you empathize with your kids, you know, when they're hungry or tired or something's really upset them. And finally, this means you're also modeling emotion regulation for your children. This is huge. Like, I cannot emphasize enough about modeling. So this first box, what I've got here, is just more of a mnemonic to summarize all the little boxes. So this sense of just stopping when you notice, you know, oh, something's big is coming up for me. So you notice, I know I got a spike of anxiety, that sense of just pressing on the brake, stopping, and that stepping back, trying to observe what is going on for you. Like you're kind of looking as a scientist, what is going on for me, and then putting into words, okay, I can feel my heart going, I think I'm anxious, my stomach's feeling unsettled. So again, just an easy way to remember this is that stop, step back, observe, and describe. So we're putting on the pause. We've raised awareness that something's going on for us. We might have flipped our lid, and we're going to try put into words and language so that we can regulate ourselves. So this then, being an observer and not a judger. This is that thing about being a scientist and making purely factual, objective observations and not subjective judgments or labeling about someone's experience. So, for example, my daughter's crying after I took the dummy from her, versus my daughter is being difficult and punishing me because I took the dummy from her. Then these next two steps are kind of, they're linked. So it can be helpful to just first ask, okay, is she or he feeling okay or not okay? And then you go further down. The next step is just zoning into that and naming the specific feelings and body sensations that are going on. And both are important. So with the example of anger or anxiety, sometimes what we notice is, well, the sensations before we realize we're actually in an anxious or angry state. So a lot of the times with anger management, we're actually people's awareness of, oh, my body is so tense now, my face is red. It helps them to put the brakes on before they actually realize they're angry. So sensations that are really important. And then finally, it's validating these experiences in a narrative. So it's telling a story of the emotions. So for example, oh my goodness, I can see you're angry and sad. Makes sense because you don't have your dummy anymore and your dummy makes you feel better. It's really hard when we don't get what we want and we don't understand why. So it's just kind of going, oh, yeah, I can see why you're upset and angry because, yeah, you're not getting something you want. It's not saying that, you know, they don't have to grow up and learn how to deal with that. It's just kind of acknowledging that's what's going on. So I'd encourage kind of practicing this at home. You can just focus on one step at a time. So for example, just focusing on observing and what would be an observation or what's being a judgment. So that is so powerful, this ability just to stop and notice, because obviously you can't do any of the other things unless you notice first and you put the brakes on. Or you might focus on naming feelings in the home. And again, I'd encourage practicing this with the whole range of emotions, not just the uncomfortable ones. So you can be going about your day-to-day life, and you're in the kitchen, your kids are there, and you go, you know what, I'm feeling so happy because, you know, you guys are all behaving so lovely to one another, and I just feel this lightness in my body. It can be something like that you just build into your everyday. So I've got a quick video here on emotion coaching. This is from the Gottman Institute. Again, anyone can find this on YouTube. I just thought this was a good example of what emotion coaching is all about.
And then the final thing that Gottman talks about that I want to address, he talks about so many things, but the final thing I want to address today is this idea of emotion coaching. What does this mean? Well, emotion coaching is kind of a fancy way of saying de-escalation. Gottman tells a story of a time when he used it, and I have a similar story. So I had a neighbor ask me if I could take her daughter to school one day with my daughters. So we were all getting ready to walk to school, and she had ridden her scooter to my house, but her mom had said, don't ride the scooter to school. We'll keep it at the house so that way we wouldn't have to worry about storage. So we were getting ready to go, and we were getting ready to walk, and she wanted to take her scooter. And I said, well, you know, we're not going to ride the scooter today. We're going to just walk to school. And she started to get sad. I was like, sweetheart, we're running behind. Let's just go ahead and go. It's going to be okay. And she started to get more sad. So I'm like, all right, I know parenting. Let me think. What can I do? So I tried to redirect her. That's a positive discipline strategy. So I redirected her, and I said, well, we can't take the scooter today, but instead you can carry this ball. And she didn't want the ball. That made her more upset. I don't want the ball. I want the scooter, and I want my mom. So she's like wanting her mom. She wants the scooter. We're running late. It's time to go. The other girls have started walking. So I'm like trying to juggle as all parents try to juggle. And so then I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to need to get firm. I need to be kind, but I also need to be firm. So I did Eliza, I'm sorry, but we need to just start walking. It's time to go. And then she went into total meltdown, super sad. And at that point, I thought, emotion coaching. So I got down to her level and I said, Eliza Grace, you're feeling really sad today, aren't you? I'm so sad. I miss my mom. I wish my mom was here. Oh, if your mom was here, you would feel so much better. I would feel so much better if my mom was here. And I wish I could give your mom. I wish she was here. I am so sorry that you're feeling sad. It's okay. I think I'm going to be late. Let's go to school. So it was that de-escalation through validation of feelings. So that's what Gottman talks about, that we need to be present, be calm, be kind. Not easy to do when you're running late for school. And you have to sometimes be intentional. Because it wasn't my child, I probably worked a little harder. I think we're all guilty of like, come on, let's go. But that calming down, validating the feelings, really gave her the peace that she needed to move forward. We walked to school, and that's an example of how to utilize emotion coaching.
Okay. So just to draw your attention, like with emotion coaching, there are so many resources out there. These are just some examples that you can find freely available online that kind of walk you through different steps of emotion coaching. The one on the right there is from the Australian Childhood Foundation, and that's got heaps of resources on it that are really wonderful, and that can help you out. Some other ideas about emotion coaching, if you want to get really into words and languages, just you get a list of emotions. If you're trying to really pinpoint exactly what's going on and get quite developed about it, And some things that are helpful are emotion cards. So on the right, there is just one I Googled. They're printable emotion cards, can help young kids where it's seeing the expression of the face. And sometimes that's easier to point to help them figure out, oh, that's what I'm feeling. You can play games with these cards, lots of different things. And the ones on the left are from a deck of cards called Mixed Emotions. I'm just showing them because they're one I have and I like, particularly say for adolescents, where some people can more just connect with the image that's on there, even if it's not that exact word. And yeah, they're just different ways of connecting with emotions, which is kind of that going more for that picture way to connect that image with language. And so I might actually just keep going and we can answer any questions about the emotion coaching and the bigger Q&A, because I think that seemed to be actually quite popular. So what we'll finish up with is just some takeaway messages from today, and going back to those two first messages again, that all your child needs is you to be a good enough parent. So again, 30% being with is good enough. It's never too late. You can learn these sorts of things. The biggest healer of any sort of relationships is compassion. And so never give up hope. The next one is, learning to be with your own emotional experience so that you can be with your child. So practicing those sorts of emotion coaching techniques and raising awareness of what's going on for you, and regulating yourself alongside regulating your child. And cutting yourself some slack as well, learning, again, we have that tendency in today's society to put everything on the individual, but also know that sometimes, a lot of the times, we need help to regulate ourselves. So it's not all about doing it on your own. It's about also knowing when to ask help. Like, you know what, I'm really struggling to get on top of this. I need some help. And summarizing everything is abiding in love, because when we're in love, where we're not fearful, we don't give up, we just keep going, and we can give ourselves to others to be able to have that capacity to hold their experience, and also have compassion for what's going on for us as well, and know that we don't have to be perfect, because we have a Father who completely understands what it is to struggle. So they're the kind of takeaways from today, and that's where I was going to end, Mike, and we can go into the Q&A if you like.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, that was very helpful. I've made a lot of notes, so thank you for sharing. What I'm going to do is, I think for your own physical health, just stand up for a moment, stretch your arms, and sit back down. Just with Q&A. Sorry, Esther, I cut you off there for a moment. What were you going to say?
Do you want me to stop sharing?
You can keep your screen on, because I think some of the questions may need reference back to your slides.
Yeah.
So we're going to, just for the next 15 minutes or so, we want to field any questions that you have. So some of the material that perhaps Esther has presented has raised some questions for you, but also the Q&A now is also, it's actually open for any questions on mental health that maybe weren't even covered in there. And it could be personal questions as well about, your own situation. So there's two ways to do the Q&A. Again, if you want to write your question in Slido, it can be made anonymous if you prefer. So go to the link there in the chat. Or we'll also have a bit of time just to, if you want to just go old school and just talk to Esther and ask her your question that way. So as you keep thinking about questions, Esther, we might just kick off with the Q&A.
Sure.
So based on Slido, there were quite a few questions, I guess, going back to some of the earlier things you talked about with flipping the lid, green zone. things. So in that realm, there's quite a few questions. The most upvoted question is this question here: should we still empathize with our kids if the emotion they are expressing is irrational? So there's been quite a few questions about trying to get our heads around whether emotions, I think, are they neutral? Are some actually more evil than others? How do we sort of understand those things?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'd start off going back to that functional perspective of emotions, that there aren't any that are right or wrong, negative or positive. We kind of more use the language of some are uncomfortable and others are comfortable. They serve a purpose. And so with emotions that are considered irrational, I would say that no one responds in a way for no reason. And so there's something in that young person's experience that it makes perfect sense why they're reacting that way. So in those sorts of cases, like, again, there will be exceptions to this, but I would still be validating that and exploring more, being curious, again, being that observer, not making evaluations about what is going on, and exploring, okay, why are you so anxious right now? You know, what's going on? And I think most of the time you'll actually understand there's something that makes a lot of sense. There's something under there that has gone off, they flipped their lid. It makes sense that for them, something is a big deal that we might not understand, but for them, it's a big deal. And regardless of what's going on, I think, you know, when a kid, say, is in that red zone, you're not going to get down quickly by trying to reason, because they're just not in that mind state to be able to reason. So my go-to would always be to validate. And I'd say in most cases that would be the best approach. I think where you're going to more the exceptions, one example I can think of is if we're in a chronic state of overwhelm. If we are constantly validating, being in that state of overwhelm, I would say there's something else going on. So I would say it's not so much the problem is the validating. I'd say that maybe it's something about how we're going about validating, or how we're approaching the emotion coaching, or something else that is actually going on to keep that kid at an elevated state. So yeah, I'd say by and large, I would validate even if it seems irrational, as a general rule of thumb.